Hi, everyone. My name is Merson Said, Executive Vice President and Chief Startup Officer here at KiwiTech. On behalf of the entire KiwiTech family, a very warm welcome to all those attending today's event. A special welcome to a few hundreds of those guests who have joined us for the first time, and to their benefit, I'll run a quick overview of KiwiTech and our innovation ecosystem. So we at KiwiTech are a global community of innovators, mentors, investors, and enterprises. Today, we are home to a family of 250 plus portfolio companies. Predominantly, most of our portfolio companies are from the US. We have a few startups from Canada, from the Middle East, and from Europe. We take great pride in helping our startups with technology, capital, mentorship, and go-to-market. We've raised more than $75 million in capital for our portfolio companies. And the real stickiness in our ecosystem is that we do this as a very integrated ecosystem of contributions from everyone involved in a typical startup mode. So just as a milestones and roadmaps, the founders of KiwiTech, they started their first venture in 1989, ran it over a period of 2 decades before exiting in 2012. The KiwiTech Startup Program was launched in 2013, and we have kind of grown into this ecosystem today, which is a very integrated, one of its kind ecosystems, helping startups, investors, and everyone who want to come into an early stage and move to a growth stage environment. We believe that we are on track to become an ecosystem of at least 1,000 plus portfolio companies by 2023. Our partnership model on the technology front, we provide services in exchange for an equity position in startups, partial exchange of those services in equity. But I think our true strength is the ecosystem of events that we put together. We organize a variety of events, empowering our entrepreneurs, investors, and other corporations who want to get involved in the innovation ecosystem. And I think this is a complement to the power of the entire ecosystem. Over the last 2 years, we have reviewed close to 65,000 entrepreneurs, taking them to different due diligence stages to onboard about 165 portfolio companies. Again, talking about some of our events, again, we have events that cater to the palette of everyone involved in a startup environment, whether it's entrepreneurs who would like to pitch to our investors through demo days, through our venture panels, venture fairs, family office events. We also have workshops wherein mentors across a variety of topics provide insights and learnings to our entrepreneurs. We also organize hackathons that talk about innovation at different industry verticals. And we also bring in industry experts to talk on specific industry topics like the one today. We just had a family office, a week earlier, wherein we brought in the Forbes family, the Coke, the DuPont family, again, sharing some of their investment insights. And we also had some of our best portfolio companies pitch to a group of family offices and VCs. As I said, we do VC panels. Some of the VCs that participated in our VC panels, the one that was held in July. Again, it's a unique model wherein the VCs who participate in the panel are also able to connect with exciting startups as part of investment due diligence. And again, we do this different industry panels. We did an industry panel focused on insurtech in July, and we're focusing on social impact today. Demo days are again a very popular events that a lot of startups in the KiwiTech portfolio would be well aware of. These are 6 of our startups who present almost on a bi-weekly basis to a group of about 50 to 60 investors. For us, some of the very prevalent social events matter, and we believe that today, as our portfolio is growing into a very big ecosystem of also minority founders, we organize a specific investor event, having one of our 8 portfolio companies pitch to a group of investors who invest predominantly in Black entrepreneurs. And we also had a fantastic, exciting panel discussion on it. We also had a great music performance by an award-winning artist. Again, women form at least 20% of our entire portfolio. Some fantastic women innovation in our ecosystem, and we celebrated by organizing a variety of events around women in tech. Online workshops, as I talked about, are another initiative that we organize every month to bring in experts from different walks of life to help and coach our entrepreneurs. The COVID-19 Techathon was a fantastic event attended by more than 2,000 guests, showcasing some of the most innovative solutions in the context of COVID-19. We organize it across different industry verticals. We also have an upcoming Techathon that we'll be organizing in September, showcasing some of the most leading innovations in different industry verticals. Venture Fair, I would highly encourage everyone to attend our Venture Fair that's coming up tomorrow and day after. We have 2 different tracks, great panelists, great startups pitching at this Venture Fair. We've split into 2 verticals, healthcare and fintech. So if anyone is interested in our Venture Fair, to get in contact with us through events@KiwiTech.com. And coming to today's event, I think with the deadly virus, crazy fires, a series of civic and social disturbances, social enterprise, social impact innovation, social impact investment are no more isolated topics of interest. They are mainstream. Ironically, they've always been mainstream, but the level of engagement from all walks of life with the sincerity of purpose that it deserves and the intensity that it deserves to affect change has been unfortunately lacking. We at KiwiTech believe that our role as an innovation ecosystem will be incomplete if we do not bring some of the most credible change makers in the social impact world, share their insights, learnings, and explain why is it important for us to discuss the greater good for all of us and how each one of us could be part of it. This event is one of our initiatives towards it, and I'm thrilled to welcome a very close dear friend of KiwiTech, our own portfolio company founder and CEO, Alan Bowden of Community Data Platforms, as the moderator of this fantastic profile. Alan, thank you so very much for taking the time to being here. Alan is very passionate about making communities better understood so they can be better served. He's a successful serial entrepreneur, a longtime advisor to Eric Schmidt, the former chair and CEO of Google and Alphabet. When you talk to enterprises and community organizations, governments, economic development organizations, major philanthropies, and healthcare institutions, you realize that each of them lack data, methodologies, and skilled teams to unlock community understanding. That's where Alan and the team at Community Data Platforms come in. KiwiTech is a partner in building several of their products. And one of the most exciting scalable product that Community Data Platform is developing right now is an equitable vaccine distribution methodology. So I'm super excited to have Alan in the midst of everything that he's doing at CDP to be with us to moderate this fantastic panel. And to all the guests who've assembled, we want this event to be very inclusive, both in terms of thoughts and exchanges. So I highly encourage everyone to participate with your questions and thoughts to the panelists and the moderator. Questions or any thoughts that you have for the panelists or the discussion can be posted via the chat feature, and one of the panelists or the moderator will pick them and respond. So over to Alan and the fantastic panel. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today.
Moshe, thanks a lot. Thanks for arranging this. This is sort of a hot topic, and I've learned a ton prepping for today. But as we'll talk a little bit about this issue has been around for a long while. Arguably, the modern history starts in the 1960s, where protesters demanded universities disengage and disinvest from defense contractors. But I'm going to pull on one of our panelists, Bill Cunningham, to give us more history, going back even to the Quakers. And we've seen a lot of growth, arguably, as Ahmed schooled me, because of millennials. So there's an increased focus on impact. And arguably, just in the last few months, we've seen the issues of equity bring this issue even further in front, particularly in thinking about how minorities are underserved in the venture community or women are underserved in the tech community. So we're going to touch on some of these. We have a few goals. One is to give just a little bit of historical context. The next is to provide a few different frameworks, and I think this panel will give you a few different ways to think about it. And we want to give you some practical advice and some really good examples of impact in today's market. I did not know any of these panelists, and so it was super fun to spend a little time with them last week. And as I told each of them, I am connecting with all of them after this, and I'd encourage you to reach out as well. They were all very generous with their time, passionate about what they're doing, and an hour is not nearly enough. So 2 rules for running a panel, as I've learned. 1 is know the audience, and 2 is don't be boring. So on the first one, we checked the motion, and it is what we thought. It's about half founders and half investors. So we're going to hit issues that we hope are helpful to both. And in terms of the don't be boring, I think there is fierce agreement among panelists that this is an important time for impact, and we're all believers in it. But to the extent there are different perspectives or different points of view, I encourage people to dive in. What I'm going to do quickly is every good entrepreneur has their literal elevator speech of like a minute. So I'm going to frame that for the panelists and ask you to do it, which is 1, what are you passionate about? What are you doing now? And why are you taking your time to be on this panel? You must care about this in some way, or someone's like giving you a free trip to Fiji. So Bill, we're going to start with you.
Outstanding. So I'm Bill Cunningham. I'm an economist trained at University of Chicago. What I've been doing since I graduated many, many moons ago is trying to make economics work for everybody instead of a narrow group. And the way I've done that is by inventing new instruments, financial tools to maximize social return. First thing I had to do was, of course, develop a methodology to calculate social return, but that was pretty straightforward. And then I basically devoted the rest of the 30 plus years or so that I've been working on this to developing new tools, new analysis kits, that sort of thing. And lastly, let me give a shout out to my current and former interns and future interns. I invited a bunch of potential interns to this call. If you're on this call, send me an email if you're a potential potential intern, because this is part of the test. Sorry about that. I'm kind of all over the place. But thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
Great. Thanks, Bill. Jessica.
Hi, everyone. So happy to be here. I think there are 3 issues that I am passionate about and that serve as my North Stars in my life. And those issues are the education system, the criminal legal system, and the racial wealth gap. I think using those as my guides have really taken the form of a very interesting career, which started in education, then led me to founding a program out of Stanford's business school to help Latinx entrepreneurs scale their businesses, led me to business school to study social entrepreneurship. I became, while in business school, I met the CEO of Headspace, which is a meditation app, and that led me there to start the social impact team. And now I am at Stat Zero, which is a public sector VC fund that invests in emerging technology and bold entrepreneurs that can help us move the world towards zero poverty, zero disease, and zero pollution. So happy to be here.
Great, and we're going to come back to the point of zero, which I thought was super compelling. Chris has an amazing background, so we'll see if you can do it in 45 seconds.
Well, I just applied for Bill's internship, so I really appreciate that opportunity, Bill. I come from the world of politics. I started when I was really young. So when you start in politics when you're young, you somewhat get a jaded perception of reality. That ultimately led me to be in rooms of some overwhelmingly influential people in my life. But no matter what, I still ended up a drug addict. I ended up homeless. I ended up a felon. I ended up spending 119 days in jail and starting over with absolutely nothing. And, my focus in life now, I have the pleasure of serving as the director of global reach for Sensi Media Group, award-winning media publication house, 15 magazines. And I came over to the world of cannabis because there are a lot of gaps that I'd like to close and eliminate barriers towards social impact in the cannabis arena. And it is one industry that right now is an untapped resource in society to actually close and eliminate some of these major concerns and vexing social issues that we have in all the things that we care about. So that's where I'm spending my time right now, Alan, the exciting world of cannabis. And, I really appreciate the opportunity to sit next to such amazing panelists. And I enjoyed our time last week, Alan, and look forward to all that we have to come.
Great. Ahmed.
Thanks for having us on, Alan. Thanks to KiwiTech. for organizing such a great event. My passion is simple. It's young people and giving them an opportunity to break the wheel that otherwise wouldn't have it. My purpose is the impact enterprise and evangelizing what the future of impact looks like and how you can become a billionaire by helping a billion people. And we're doing that across 121 different countries at the Whole Prize Foundation. I'm here on this panel to drop some nuggets of insight. I've been in impact for 11 years. What you don't hear about today, you can hear about in my book, The Pursuit of Impact. You can register for your copy today at pursuitofimpact.org. Pleasure to be here.
121 countries. How many more to go?
I don't know. They tell me there's 160 some, but those numbers keep changing. If you know, I'm Palestinian as well, so I'm just waiting until we get our own country. That's my primary focus. So,
all right, Rachelle. Last but not least.
Hi, thank you, Alan. My name is Rachelle Haber-Thompson. I have been passionate and involved in the social enterprise entrepreneurial ecosystem for the past decade. I initially started out of business school working in the impact investing, early stage investing side. So helping super early stage companies get access to capital from angel investors. And from there have been doing a lot of coaching and consulting work with social enterprises for their operations and finance and fundraising support, as well as in the US, as well as in East Africa. I am also passionate about sustainability and recently launched my own venture with a co-founder, and we are helping to change the swag industry. So Blue Dot is disrupting the corporate swag industry by providing sustainable branded merchandise that helps align company stakeholders with their values, cultures, and purpose. So we are trying to shift the way that companies purchase their branded items. And I'm here because I love to learn from wonderful people and be a part of the conversation. So thank you.
And Rachelle has really elevated this idea of corporate promotional products such that when I said, isn't it swag? She sort of pulled back from the screen and said, we don't like to use that term. So I'm glad you used it because it does help define it, but I won't use it again. You've trained me. That is not your field.
Thanks.
So I like to, as people who know me, I like to sort of bracket the universe so I can understand the edges of what we're talking about. And so I would say, as I started to think about impact, and I've been thinking about it for a few years, and I don't come from a social enterprise place, I've been an entrepreneur. So it's easy for me to set the left bracket, which is Adam Smith. My selfishness benefits everyone. Or, maybe more modern times and a little less elegant is Gordon Gekko, greed is good. So we've got that over on one side. And then the middle, a decade ago, you've got these benefit corporations, which think of Ben and Jerry, that weren't happy with how their company got sold, but it had to get sold because there were shareholders, and the only loyalty was to maximizing dollars. So benefit corps came along and said, look, you can think about other things. And now, just in the last few months, you have the Business Roundtable with CEOs at Amazon, Apple, JP Morgan, Boeing, GM saying, there's a role for purpose-driven executives. So that's kind of a middle position. And then over on the right, Ahmed and I had this fierce conversation in a really positive way about sort of this, what I would call the enlightened or most passionate position, which is, if you're not thinking about impact, you're going out of business. It's totally in your interest to be thinking about impact. So it gets you up every day. It creates a huge runway for you. There's a huge market opportunity. So I think everywhere from greed is good to the most passionate position, and hopefully we'll touch on this. That's how I frame the issue. And I would just at the outset say, you do not have to think about impact as one which sacrifices return. Those days are over. That was 5-10 years ago. Let's do the right thing, and maybe we're not going to get 10x, we're going to get 3x, but we're all going to feel good. Those days are over. I'm running a passion focused business, and we're in the market with everyone else. So that's how we frame it. And staying on framing for a minute, Bill and I had a really interesting conversation, not going back to the dawn of time, but going back to the time of Quakers. Can you give us this historical context, Bill, around impact investing? Super helpful to me.
Sure, sure. The Quakers are a religious group. It started in England. They got kicked out of England. They came over to the US. Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Paine, all of these foundational names were either members or affiliated with that movement. Now, the key part about Quakers to remember is this: they were founded in 1620. When they were founded, Black people, women, everybody was an equal member in that order. That was incredibly unusual for the time, but the overall overarching philosophy was that all human lives are of equal value. And they were saying this during a time when, if you did not agree that the king was the supreme being in your culture, you would be put to death. So that's why they got kicked out of England. But that philosophy informs everything that we do. This idea that, yes, you can be very early in recognizing the absolute value of all human lives. And I want to separate that away from the whole Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter debates that are going. Of course, all lives matter, you know. Where we are with Black Lives Matter, it's like saying save the whales.
I'm going to interrupt you.
Okay.
What debate is that all lives matter? All lives are not at risk of being persecuted and dying and jeopardy of survival. I'm sorry.
And I was just getting there.
No debate here.
I'm with you. I was just getting there. Saying save the whales does not mean let's get rid of all of the other fish. You know, that's kind of the way that I like to, and I think that's on point with what you're saying. So, but not to get into that. Bottom line is that this was a very early in Western civilization. A group that very early on looked at just maximizing social return, saying, hey, we're all on this planet together. We've all got to live together. You know, like Martin Luther King said, we'll either profit together as brothers or we will perish together as fools. And so that again informs the way that we approach social impact investing. And Ahmad, I really appreciate your comments. All right, no interruption there. Jump in at any time, okay?
And Ahmed, I'm going to jump to you because if we start with the Quakers, and it was sort of obvious to all of us, I saw you nodding. You and I had this conversation about if you're not in the impact space, you're going out of business. Why is that so from a market force point of view, in your experience?
Sure. I mean, and thank you, William, for giving me the opportunity to jump in. But look, I think that it's not a function of this idea to do good for the sake of being a good person or a good company. What you have is a transfer of wealth, which is the amount is $60 trillion, which will move from my parents and my grandparents to millennials. And you're talking about an entire generation who's grown up connected, right? Anywhere from 1980, 82 to 92, 94. If you've been born in this demographic, you grew up witnessing the injustices of society around the world. And guess what happens in the next 3 years? This generation will inherit $5 trillion, right? By 2060, it's $60 trillion. We control the money, we control companies, we control the wealth, and in some cases, we're beginning already to control nations. So this mentality is driving corporations and as a result, startups, vendors, and everybody in between to rethink impact. Not from the lens of doing good because it's the right thing to do, doing good because doing good equates with market cap.
Yep, so those numbers kind of blew me away, and it's coming over the next few decades, but some of it's coming very, very near term. So we're seeing just the early edge of that.
And you're seeing markets react already. If you look at Nike and when they came out with their marketing campaign to stand with the famous San Francisco quarterback Kaepernick, their stock price, while initially taking a dip on those ads, eventually rebounded where the market responded. Shareholder value was created as a response to taking a position of inclusivity. So we're seeing some of those things from the market, and investors don't care. They just want to make money, and that's okay for me. It's a matter of giving them what they want. And today, what they need to make maximum returns is impact.
And so that's a good segue. And I was going to throw this one to you, Jessica, which is one of the topics we talked about, which is measurement. So Ahmed and I talked to you, he said, don't worry about measurement. Have a good product. The market will tell you if it's working. Impact, you're crazy if you're not in that space. But you've had some institutional experience where investors, particularly on the institutional side, need to measure, Bill and I spoke about the same topic, need to measure impact beyond financial return. Can you talk a little bit about the role in that? Because you're a believer in reasonable measurement of the achievement of these goals.
Absolutely. And I actually want to add to Ahmed's point, where it's not just the Nikes of the world that are seeing returns on their investment by doing good, the long-term return on investment, but it's also just any of these impact investment funds in their recent reports have also time and time again demonstrated that investing for impact actually gives you equal returns on investment or better returns on investment. So just to add to your point, Ahmed. And yes, so I do believe in some form of measurement on impact. I do think that it can be difficult, and there are lots of organizations that are trying to figure out some standardization. I think the way that we've done it at StatZero is we've thought about it in the same way that we think of financial screening. So the same way that you would assess, for example, an investment for financial return, potential financial return, we developed a framework that works for us on how might we assess these companies pre-investment for potential return on impact. And it's a really difficult conversation. Again, there are so many institutions working on this. The way that we did it is, I did a bunch of research, talked to Omidyar Network, talked to all of these foundations, Caper Capital, really tried to learn around what had worked and what didn't work in terms of measurement and what made sense in a reasonable way. And because we knew that our LPs would want to know, what kind of impact are you actually having? And so we developed this framework that really takes a holistic approach to impact. What I found in the industry was that there were kind of two ways that people were looking at impact. And one was what I call internal impact. So you had these funds or companies that were looking at investing in underrepresented populations or underestimated founders. So Black, Latinx, women, or other populations that have been left out of this market. And then there were others that really didn't care about that. What they really cared about is what good do you want to do? So in the typical way you think of impact, what is that external positive effect you want to have on the world with this product, service, or technology? And really my argument was that they both mattered. And I think we're starting to see that now. And so we took internal impact and external impact and created something that worked for us in terms of measuring zero poverty, zero pollution, and zero disease. Again, these are just proxies. I think there's a lot more work to do. And we've been stress testing it and iterating on it, but it's really to help us gauge that potentiality of impact.
And is there for anyone who's a startup running their own company, there is this notion of certified B Corp, right? Has anyone done that? If you have, just raise your hand. We're looking at it. So there are some ways in which you can measure yourself that exist. You've talked about designing one, but what I've heard from people is, in the end, it sort of doesn't matter as long as you're intentional about it. Is that right? Does that sound right to you?
I think the intentionality matters for sure. And I do think that you should be looking at some type of metric that works for whatever category you're investing in. So for example, for us in zero literacy, what we're looking at is how many people have been educated with the companies that we're investing in. Or with zero pollution, we're looking at carbon, reduction. And so there's certain metrics that we do look at, but it depends. And the intentionality is absolutely a must.
Right. One of the things you talked about being able to measure is your employees internally. And Chris and I talked a little bit about this. Chris, given your background as an addict, you're a believer in people in recovery having a business. As I run a startup, I said to Chris, how the hell do you do that? Like, I can barely function just running a startup, never mind, trying to get healthy and whatever other issues come up. And you had a really compelling response as to why it's in your own interest as an employer to think about hiring some of these people who have had real challenges in their lives. Can you touch on that?
Well, you know, I can say this, you know, it wasn't until after I faced my challenges that I went through my humbling as an entrepreneur, right? You know, you have to face adversity in your own life to understand how to overcome it in the future. And one of the things I find interesting is why I started my original public relations firm was because there's this scarlet letter that people wear when they come out of institutions. You know, I believe recovery comes from not just addiction. You know, people recover from divorce, bankruptcy. You know, nowadays being trolled on social media. You know, there are a lot of these things, and when we have this bias and it enters into the world of social enterprise, it on accident takes away people from their core values in making decisions. You know, I was working with a social enterprise one day, and the whole premise of it was to make an impact for people that are re-entering society, except they refused to actually involve people that have gone through the process of re-entering society within their corporate leadership. And it didn't quite make sense to me. It's almost like this notion of hypocrisy that's built around social enterprise. But you see, that's where some of the gaps and barriers exist. It's surely a lack of information. And one thing I could say is this: if I'm a large corporation like Motorola, and I'm about to bring people in and start an incubator or something of that nature, I know people that are on probation and people that are just coming out of institution. They have people that are checking on them every single day. You have drug tests that are being taken by them through institutional protection. They're on probation oftentimes. So you're never going to find a period in time in someone's life where they're more micromanaged and more within on the radar of knowing if they're doing something wrong until they come out of this arena. And mark my words, if you dangle real opportunity in front of them that they believe in, the lack of the likelihood of recidivism, I mean, goes down into less than 10%, at least in what I've seen in life. So that's the real answer to it, Al.
Yeah, and the story you told, which was very personal, and I think you're upfront about it, was, look, if you're a drug addict, you are an entrepreneur every day. You need to generate revenue every day.
Every single day.
Because you have expenses. And
You know,
if you
I was
put that in the context of business, it's a very powerful idea.
I spent $300 a day on heroin, right? Now, mind you, before this, I worked for the president. I traveled around the country. I was in Republican Party politics, which was actually somewhat harder to recover from in society in some regards than it was from the heroin addiction. But I can tell you that entrepreneurial spirit, if I was starting a firm in Wall Street, first thing I would do is go get those recovering drug addicts and teach them, get them a Series 7. And I guarantee you, they will outsell any Wall Street floor, Al.
Right. So that's I found very compelling, the idea that it's, don't do it because it's the right thing to do. Do it because it's in your own interest.
Smart business choice.
Rachelle, you have a background that's really interesting because you've advised others, and now you've got your own impact startup. And you know, here you are. Sometimes it's easy to give other people advice, and it's hard to give yourself advice. What in that transition? What's the hardest advice that you've given to yourself? That you give to an entrepreneur easily, but for yourself, you sort of find it difficult to execute around?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think the biggest thing to always recognize is, and it's really hard when you're working on your own thing, is just how much time it takes to do what you want to do. For example, when I working with companies on fundraising, they want to raise money like yesterday and they're starting today. And so it takes on average 6 months plus to raise outside capital. We're not raising capital, but it permeates in other elements of the business where you really want to run really fast and sprint, and sometimes you do have to walk a little bit and set some foundations for the business to be able to run and go after it. And in some regards, COVID was a good time for us to take a step back and take a little bit of a slowdown and think about some of our bigger strategic things, work on our website, do other, those basic things that we really needed to get foundations for before we could really move as fast as we wanted to. But that's certainly one of the things that investors will always question when they talk to entrepreneurs around their projections and their speed. And it's certainly something that is hard to take because as a founder yourself, because you really just want this thing to fly, and it, it will, and that's why you're doing it. But sometimes in the moment, it feels like, there's a lot of roadblocks. So I think just kind of persistence has been things that I've had to kind of learn myself and kind of think about where those aren't necessarily the types of things I talk to entrepreneurs about necessarily.
Yep, it's funny. I don't know what you're talking about, but things take longer. Really? Even if you have the best idea in the world, that's weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bill, you talked about you being in your field for a few decades. I don't know if that's it, if it's the sound of your voice or the great conversation we had last week, but there's sort of this air and I'm sure reality of wisdom around you. You mentioned interns to me and you mentioned them again today. As you advise young people, what do you organize your thoughts and sort of sharing your wisdom with interns? How do you organize that? What's the priority as you interact with them?
Well, that's a good question. I would not claim wisdom. It's something that is always just there, just out of reach for me. But what I try to do is I try to help young people that come to me, and I've got a very active internship program, 60 applicants for 5 positions in this latest go round. I try to highlight institutional concerns. I also try to encourage open-minded thinking about these economic issues. Now, here's what I mean by that. If you look at current Western society with respect to the options that you're given for the management and allocation of economic resources, you're given 2 options. One, a Scottish white guy, Adam Smith, and the other, an English guy, Karl Marx. You mean to tell me that if you look at all of humanity, there are only 2 ways to organize the allocation of economic resources? That's absolutely untrue. There are a million ways to do it, a million ways to do it. And that's what I see with impact investing. We're just beginning to explore some of those additional ways of organizing the allocation of resources. No, we're not there yet. My perspective is we still overemphasize and are too solicitous of the investment world, as opposed maximizing financial return, as opposed to purely maximizing social return. I think we'll get there though. And the other thing is, what I discovered one of the things I've discovered in working with young people is that they are serious about this. They know that 30 years from now, if they don't make significant changes now, they're not going to have water, they're not going to have air, no telling what the social systems will look like. I like Chris's comment about, the Republicans being kind of an addictive group. You're absolutely right. And that style of thinking is very addictive because it's so easy. If you can tie all of human life to money, it's so easy, but it's also so wrong. So what we try to do is we try to expand that selection set. We try to get people to understand the institutions, understand who the Fed is. No, the Fed is not a cabal of bankers. It's just a bureaucracy, like any other. Get away from all of those extremist perspectives. Look at the mechanics of the institutions themselves. And then also look at the mechanics of the theories that you are unconsciously paying, Econ 101, unconsciously kind of paying attention to and question those sorts of things. I hope that was clear. Was that helpful?
Yeah, super helpful. And Bill, if I said to you, for people who are listening in, they want to read a good book that you think sort of, and I know you're writing one, so it probably isn't out there till yours is done. But if they needed one this week, as opposed to when yours is finished, is there a book that you think people would enjoy reading to give them some perspective on the topic?
What's they call it a radical left-wing book, but it is not. It's about America. I'm getting older. I can't remember the guy's name who wrote it. I think one of the other books, though, would be Naomi Klein has a book about crisis economics. There was that, speaking of Chris, I'm going back to Chris, who was that Republican consultant who in the 80s outlined all of this. He wrote a book, The Politics of Rich and Poor. So if you just Google that title, he will come up. But there are a number of good analysts who have looked at these situations and said, listen, we understand the dominant kind of school of thought that's driving us in this direction. Shareholder wealth maximization. We also understand why that's wrong. It's not broad enough. It doesn't measure, getting back to Jessica's point, it doesn't measure what you need to measure. Think about Robert Kennedy. GNP tells us everything about the economy except what is really valuable in terms of human life. So those would be, so, and again, I hope that's clear. I'm going to Google those titles for those books right now. But those would be some of the ones that I'd recommend.
Great. Back to Chris. Chris, one of the things we talked about was owning your truth from a PR perspective. You were a storyteller when you worked for the Republican Party. You went through this really tough period from which you emerged stronger, I assume, and now you're running a series of magazines. What do you say to founders in response to this own your truth from a PR perspective? Why did I circle that when we spoke?
When I got out of jail, I then became a storyteller for the Democrat Party. Right now, I'm a nonpartisan in my registration. But, it's one of those things that if you go online and look at any of the videos, or the first 20 minutes in pretty much every video, I talk pretty much in detail about, how I went to jail, my addiction, everything. People like, in sales, I work with a lot of salespeople, vice president of revenue in our company and our CEO both come from the sales world. And people don't like to be sold, but they love to buy. And people like buying things they can relate to. Everybody on this call, everybody in society has something inside that they're not comfortable about in their past. So whenever you tell something about your life, that the assumption would be, wow, I can't believe this person is sharing it. What you are actually doing is inviting the other person to feel just a little bit more comfortable around you. Make them realize that, you know what? I accept you. That's why I'm here. I'm in a conversation with you because I want to be, not because of your past. And what I found out is when I really started sharing, coming from politics, Republican Party politics, the last thing you ever want to share is that you had a drug addiction, right? And literally, it was on the front page of the paper and everything, Alan, when I went to jail because I was this leader. And my mother, who actually was a leader in law enforcement, they had a whole front page article about her in Inside, son arrested at funeral home. So just devastating. I'm in jail. Half the people I'm with in jail, my parents had arrested one time through their lives because they were in law enforcement. And, there was no hiding. So the best thing to do was I wanted to start a PR firm to help people talk about it. Because when you talk about it, you actually have real change. You lived your truth, and I will never go back. There's no point in lying in public relations. And if you're explaining things, you're losing. So that's where the truth comes in as the quickest way to resolution.
Okay.
Can I add something there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So although I'm all about being unapologetic and owning my truth, I also have to say that owning your truth has definitely served to the benefit of some people over others. Chris, you can probably attest to this as well, where, of course, me owning my truth as, an educated, Stanford educated Latina with a certain, type of income is very different than, my brother who is currently incarcerated, for example, owning his truth. If he owned his truth or were upfront, Chris, in looking for funding, he would probably get the door shut on him by most people. So I saw someone in the chat saying, impact investment and how we should approach that, to Ahmed's point. And I do want to say that it does take that change of mentality so that everyone can own their truth in equitable ways, because if not, we're going to continue, elevating certain people owning their truth over others as we have done. And that has resulted in where we are today. So I just wanted to put that caveat, Chris.
I think that's remarkable,
yeah.
Jessica. Matter of fact, I never actually thought about it from that perspective. I wasn't able to get a job. Matter of fact, I was living in a recovery home serving as a bartender. Somehow that was accepted in the probation system, but it was not, I couldn't come in at, let's say, an entrepreneur time late at night because I was up doing business meeting or something because of the rules and restrictions. It's two parts on this. I think as society, we need to realize as society, if we are what we say we are, then there is a space in society for those people that are coming out. And that means you can't judge. And I love states that are now removing things like requiring people to put down that they were a felon until they've worked their way and progressed through the system. The Center for Health and Justice in Illinois, and even Nevada here at the state legislature, has made some changes where you don't have to put your history on the front side until you know you have real opportunity. And that changes the dynamics of employers. But I also say it comes from that person that's starting their life over. And I volunteer to help anybody that, people that even your brother when he rejoins society. There's an air of confidence that needs to come from the recovery process. And it's not just about I know plenty of people that went to jail and prison that come out somewhat worse. It's like but then there are people that have actually come in and learned so much about life that they deserve a chance, because I promise you some of the changes to our vexing social problems are coming from the people that nobody had listened to before. And that's why their life went down that path, because sometimes they're just upset for not being heard. So I'm going to help close that gap, Jessica. And I really appreciate you bringing up that point. I'd love to touch base with you more on that and learn a little bit more. That's exciting.
Yeah.
And Rachelle, when we spoke, I also circled the word storytelling. So I know that's part of your background, probably both as an advisor and a founder. Can you give your perspective on storytelling?
Yeah, so storytelling is incredibly important for many reasons. At Blue Dot, we tell the stories of the products that we help sell, because we think that the stories around the sustainability and also the workforce practices that our manufacturers use are really compelling, and they help to share what the great work is that they're doing. And it's important because, as people may or may not know, millennials are they have a huge share of wallet now, and they are a lot of our workforce, and they really care about the companies that they work for, and they care about the companies that they purchase from. I think it's something like 80% of, nearly 80% of millennials want the values of their companies to match their own. 88% of consumers want businesses to help them make a difference. It's to Amit's point about Nike, right? When companies are doing good things and share those stories, it helps attract talent, it helps attract customers. And we also have to be careful at the same time not to be greenwashing or kind of sugarcoating the impact that we as businesses are having on our stakeholders. So I think that's incredibly important. Transparency helps with that, but it takes a lot of education. It takes a lot of digging ourselves to understand what the true impact is of the products that we're selling. But ultimately, if you're able to share those stories, you're going to have a more dedicated workforce. You're going to have clients that care more about what you're doing, and you're just going to be able to increase your value that much more.
Yeah, that one example is one that I've lived. This idea that if you're living the mission, you'll have more devoted employees. And that's true. I've had to recruit data scientists in this ridiculously competitive environment, but the idea of helping communities become smarter and stronger has attached people to us.
And I think it's something like 1/3, I don't actually know this specific stat, but of millennials will take a pay cut to work at a mission-driven business company and to work for companies that have aligned values. So it really does speak to attracting that top talent. Not that you should pay them less, but people are willing to do these kinds of sacrifices for companies that motivate them in these ways.
And it's why impact-driven companies can arguably have less risk rather than more.
Yes.
Because if your people are stickier, you have less risk than people who are just looking for the best new thing.
Yeah.
Ahmed, when on the practical side, when you and I spoke, we were talking, you run an incubator. In fact, someone in the chat asked to talk a little bit more about the Holt Prize. Can you talk about that, and then we were talking about whether or not, how you would educate founders, what are the 3 things they have to do, and how would you educate investors, the 3 things they should do, and we realized the 3 things are the same. So can you take us through that a little bit about the Holt Prize and a little bit of your practical advice? And again, you're muted.
Okay, I've got my fan on, so I'm trying to keep the courtesy of my co-panelists. But before starting, I have to give a shout out to our campus directors, We have campus programs across the world at more than 3,000 universities. And we have, I think, 30 or 40 countries represented on this call alone. And that gives you an idea of the power of the whole prize. But what we do is really simple. We give young people opportunities that they otherwise would not have had in the entrepreneurial space. And I think I've seen a lot of discussion on the chat on impact. Is it real? It's very real outside of the US. And the reason is whether or not you're an impact enterprise defines whether you will live or die. Okay, governments have a social responsibility to take care of their people. And a lot of people in the West, we take that for granted. We think entrepreneurship is this, I'm gonna create a unicorn. I'm gonna create $1 billion company. My entrepreneurs need to create startups to survive, not thrive, just to pay the bills and make it to the next day. And what we do with the whole prize is we create entrepreneurs from nothing. And we give them the inspiration, the toolkit, the know-how, and then the network to make average people, engineering students, students that don't think they ever have a shot at entrepreneurship because it's a rigged system in most emerging markets, we give them a chance. And we do that through training, startups, accelerators, festivals around the world. What we teach them, and I give this advice to all entrepreneurs and advise investors as well. I'm on the board of a number of investment funds, and the deal sourcing and the deal review teams are the same. Number one, are you solving the right problem? Is it human-centered? If solved, will it have plenty of impact? Okay, so problem is most important. Second, have you assembled the right team to take on solving the problem? And the question then becomes is, do I have what it takes as an individual? And do I have the ability to recruit the right tribe? If I'm suggesting a tech company, do I have programmers on my team? If I'm suggesting a company that's a communication company, do I have somebody who can sell? So the second point is assembling that right tribe. And third is, have I demonstrated traction? Because while you might think it's the right problem, you may think you have the right team, show me the money, from the Jerry Maguire film. It couldn't have been so better as a phrase, because have you demonstrated the market's appetite for your product or service? And whether you're an investor or whether you're a startup, it all starts with those 3 points. And again, the first one is the problem the right problem? Is it a big enough problem? And will it have impact if solved correctly?
And the one thing I read on your last point, which is traction, and when you're starting, you might not have lots of revenue. How do you measure product market fit? There was an Anderson Horowitz article where they said, it's very simple. You go to your first 10 customers and you ask them one question. If I pulled my service away, would you be not really disappointed, somewhat disappointed, or extremely disappointed? Mm-hmm. If 40% of people said they would be extremely disappointed, you have product market fit. And we're going to do that as a company. I think it's really good.
And it's
not
important.
90%, just 4 out of 10, extremely disappointed. You're on the right track.
We can't be obsessed with getting our product to 100% and getting so much validation that we're ready to raise money. VCs are assholes, right? I'm telling you as an investor, right? We take no risk. We assign all that risk to the entrepreneur. By the time you're ready for us to give you investment, you could probably go raise money from all your friends, family, and crowdfunding. So go out there and be the difference and the change that you want to see. And, that can be your prototype, right? Get commitments on paper, willingness to buy, willingness to perform, and the rest is history.
Well, can I give a real quick story here before we close out?
Yep, absolutely.
All right, so I just posted a link to an article on Black Enterprise concerning a project that we completed this summer. I'm going to give you the story behind that. So I asked my interns to create a list of all of the companies that had donated to Black Lives Matter. This was when it was hot back in mid-June. One of the interns, a guy named Andrew Tabor, out of Emory University, said, yeah, Mr. Cunningham, I put that list together. I thought he was going to get it to me in about a week or so. He turned around and got it to me the very next day. And I asked him, I said, well, look, man, how did you get that to me so quickly? He said, this is the kind of thing that you do with this internship that you're just not going to do anywhere else. So I got a call from the editor at Black Enterprise magazine. I was talking to him just kind of in general. And I mentioned this list. This was the same day that Mr. Tabor gave me a list. I mentioned this list. The phone got deadly quiet. You know, he said, hello, you still there? He said, wait a minute. You have the list of all of the donations to Black Lives Matter that corporations have made. Send me that list. Write an article. Now, normally what happens is, to write an article for Black Enterprise, they take about a week to get back to you. You know, they edit. This guy posted that article the very next day. I said, holy moly, what's going on here? And then it turned out that all of the kind of senior Black executives in New York, they were all having this conversation about how much money to dedicate to Black Lives Matter. One of the guys that the editor of Black Enterprise was in touch with is a frat brother of his who runs a foundation called the Ford Foundation. So when I had that number, of course, he sent it directly to the Ford Foundation. Now, they'll never admit to this. They will never admit that this is what happened, you know. But what happened was, once we established the dollar amount based on Mr. Taber's list, $1.6 billion had been allocated up to that point. The very next day, Ford Foundation and 4 other foundations came out with a Black Lives Matter donation of $1.7 billion. So what I like to tell Mr. Tabor is that he got his Black friends $1.7 billion. Whether or not anybody will agree with that, that's the story, and that's the kind of impact. So I appreciate Ahmed's focus on return. I really do. But one of the things I want to see is a movement away from a purely monetary approach, but looking at these broader types of social impacts, social implications. We didn't know that we were going to generate $1.7 billion in donations to Black Lives Matter when we did that project. But it's clear that we had an impact. And that's the kind of thing that, see, if you're looking at that from a monetary perspective, we would have never have put together that list because we didn't have a client who was paying us to do that. This was just something that I thought, hey, it'd be interesting to get this information together. The interns that I was working, they loved that idea. They absolutely loved that idea. They dedicated, devoted themselves to it. We got it done, got it in, and the next thing you know, you have this huge, huge impact. So there's room for serendipity outside of maximizing financial returns that I think is incredibly important.
Yeah, just to counter that, since you mentioned me, the problem with that, it's not sustainable. If there's no Black Lives Matter hashtag and marches in the streets, you don't raise that money. So the idea with the impact enterprise is to create a sustainable giving model, which is not dependent on emotion. And that's what the capitalistic markets do, is they continue to fuel impact while you sleep, whether there's a parade outside or whether there's, you know, no activity against a particular cause, that there's a consistent flow of capital, which is being triggered by the only currency our world knows, which is dollars. So,
yeah, I'm with you, bro. And there's room for both. There's room for, I mean, that's what we're seeing. So go ahead. Sorry.
I'm watching the time. I'm going to let Jessica in. I'm going to ask Rachelle one question, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah. Ahmad, I was going to echo what you said, and Bill, I was going to say that I think that's wonderful, but I also believe, I would argue that money that was invested was more of an outcome and not an impact, actually, because we don't know what's happening with that money. You know, we don't know what BLM is doing with it, and they have great organizations all across the United States, but the impact is it hasn't happened yet. Although it's a great output,
there is
a great
both.
outcome.
That's the other side, which needs to stay. I'm not saying you have to eliminate fundraising, right, typical philanthropy, et cetera. This is parallel tracks.
I got one question. We only have time for one question. I'm going to Rachelle with this one, which is a really good one, which I think we can all appreciate as entrepreneurs. How do you solve the dilemma of being under-resourced or underestimated while in the early stages of demonstrating traction? Right, traction is key, and it's so hard to get there. What are the earliest ways to demonstrate traction?
It's the chicken or the egg. So one thing is, I mean, this is going to sound super obvious, but just to be as scrappy as possible, to get users to start using your product, And so you can demonstrate traction. Investors might want to see revenue, but they also might want to see users. It depends on your industry. They might want to see letters of intent. It might not necessarily be revenue. So it really depends on your industry, what the sales cycle is, and what the investors that you're going after are looking for. So there's that. So understand your industry. If you're looking for investment, understand what the investors mean when they say that they want to see traction, and ask them specifically, how much revenue, how many users, like what is it that you want to see, and start updating them regularly. And then to get that is, you know, what we're doing is see what you start with, where you have your networks, what affinity networks you're a part of, your alumni groups, like anything that you can latch onto and start getting them to use and try your product. Get testimonials from them, even if it's small amounts of what they're using. You know, get that feedback, get that product feedback, and then see if you can get them to repeat buy. But as a founder, as a startup, you know, if you're bootstrapped, then it's use the resources that you can, see and see who can work with you, who's interested in working with you. Do student projects to get help from interns. There's ways to get other people to work with you to also help you gain some of that traction that you need. Yeah, but the first thing is understand what you mean when you say traction.
Yeah, and that's the network effect. So I would encourage you to read up on that. Motion, we're 5 minutes over, but I feel like we're an hour early because this could go on for a while, but I want to respect everyone's time. Are you going to dive in and wrap it up for us?
Yeah, I think we could honestly go on for the next 3 days, you know, but I think it's a complete testimony to the panelists and everyone, you know, and usually we always see, you know, like more than 50% dropping off at the end of the hour, and, you know, we were still about more than 80% of the guests still on. So that's truly remarkable to all the panelists. Fantastic, guys. And again, thank you so much. I know that we got a ton of questions. So we'll take all the questions, you know, to events@KiwiTech.com, and we'll funnel it to the panelists, you know, and then based on their approvals, you know, we'll send the responses back. And if any connection requests and so forth, you know, we'll definitely take care of it, you know, from there on. But again, thank you so much to each and one of the panelists. It was fantastic having you all. And to Alan, thank you for moderating. Fantastic. I think to have a high voltage, high octane panelist, and, you know, I think you were the perfect fit. So you did a great job, Alan. Thank you. And some of the upcoming events at KiwiTech. So again, we are an ecosystem of integrating and networking. Everybody was involved in the spirit of innovation, in the spirit of startup entrepreneurship. So love to see you all at an event very soon. So thank you again, and thanks for your time today.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.